So we are talking about taxonomy, and like it says here, taxonomy is a science. It's not the same as taxidermy. And you know what that is? Lena? Stuffing dead animals, yes. It's not taxidermy. This is taxonomy.
It's like reverse multiplication.
So it's two different things. Taxonomy is studying how we classify and group and name various types of organisms, how they're related to each other, what their common characteristics are, and so forth. All right. So as we move on and talk about the various kingdoms, we're going to use some of these words to describe the characteristics of each kingdom. So you have them here as a reference, but we'll cover them later on in our notes. All right, so taxonomy, the science of classification, grouping, organizing things, living things. And humans have been classifying, grouping things for thousands of years into groups that are similar. And there have been lots of different systems of how we could group living things according to those characteristics. And we do that to help us make sense of the world, to help show the similarities between various living organisms and the differences and how they're related to each other. You can understand this by grouping these species into various categories. The system of classification that we use today, the modern system, was really, Carl Linnaeus is described as the father of this classification system. This is Linnaeus, that is not George Washington, as some students have asked. That's Linnaeus, and Linnaeus was a naturalist, a botanist who studied plants extensively, and he liked to observe them and look at their characteristics, and he came up with our modern system. So he's known as the father of taxonomy, and he came up with this system of binomial nomenclature. Who are my Latin scholars in this class? There's a couple, right? All right. What's it say at the top of all of your papers that you get in Latin class? Nomen, what does it mean? Name. Yeah, nomen is Latin for name. We know, what does the prefix bi mean? Means two. Like a bicycle, different than a unicycle or a tricycle. Bi means two. So binomial comes from nomen, means to name, and nomenclature is a naming system. A two-name naming system. And this is the system that we use. All living species that have been identified by scientists are given a name, a two-part name, sort of like a first and a last name. And we call that their scientific name, or their binomial name. And for example, probably you know one scientific name, I would guess. Humans, what is the scientific name for the human species? What?
Homo sapiens?
Yep, Homo sapiens. That is the scientific name, the binomial name for the human species. Does anybody know any other scientific names for any other species? When I was in college, one of the classes I took was dendrology, which is studying trees and naming and classifying trees. So I know lots of the scientific names of trees. Like the birch tree out there is Betula papyrifera. This white pine tree out here is Pinus strobus. I think the cedar out there is Thuya occidentalis. So these names, there's a purpose behind these names, and we'll talk about that. But they all sound kind of weird because they're in what language? Catherine? They're in Latin. Okay? Linnaeus used Latin as the language for these scientific names. And he used it for some specific reasons. So where can you go today to hear people speak Latin as their everyday language?
Nowhere.
Where, Ian?
Nowhere.
What about Latin America?
Latin is technically considered a dead language because people don't use it in regular life.
Exactly. So Latin is not a language used in everyday language. Okay? You don't go to a certain country and they're going to be speaking Latin. Latin is the language of where then? Lena? Ancient Rome. Okay? But Latin is also the basis for Romance languages, which are languages like what?
Spanish, Italian, French,
French, yeah.
Romanian, and Latin.
Portuguese. Yeah. So those languages have roots in Latin. Okay? But Latin is a dead language, which means nobody really speaks it, and therefore it's not constantly changing as a modern language would be. In modern languages, in English or German or Chinese or any other language, new words are always being formed, and some words fall out of use. The use of certain words changes, the meaning changes. So Latin is a language that's basically set, and so it doesn't change. Okay? Also, scientists throughout the world can agree and use Latin as the language of these scientific names, and it doesn't favor one geographic area of the world versus another. Okay? Scientists can agree on it and use that as their language. And so we use Latin as our language for scientific names. In fact, Carl Linnaeus, I think his original name was Carl von Linn. He changed his name to Carolus Linnaeus, so it sounded Latin. He's really into Latin, I guess. So why do we want to give these organisms new names? We already had, people had names for all these species. You know, you could say a dog or a cat or a grasshopper or a pine tree. But giving things a name in Latin, a scientific name, is actually useful. Because often common names, when we just say dog or a pine tree, those are what we call common names. And so sometimes those common names can be misleading. For example, what is that?
Fish of the jelly.
A jellyfish. Is it a fish? No. It also does not taste very good on toast. So calling it a jellyfish is a misleading name. It's not a fish. It is an invertebrate. It is a cnidarian. It's not at all a fish. What's that?
Horse.
Hey, is it a real horse?
No.
No. What is it?
Fish or something?
Yeah. So again, the name seahorse is misleading. It's not a horse. Ooh. Ringworm. Ringworm is a skin infection a person can get. You get these rings on your skin. But it's not caused by a worm. It's caused by a fungus. So calling it ringworm is misleading. Starfish? Is it a fish? Nope. It is an echinoderm. It's an invertebrate, an echinoderm. Also, by agreeing on a specific name, people speaking various languages can ensure that they're talking about the same species. For example, we would say a dog in English. In Italian, you'd say il cane. What would you say Spanish? Perro. French? French? Any French students? No French students in this whole class? Or you just don't want to admit it? What is it?
I think it's Chien.
Chien, okay. All right. So obviously, if we use those words, we're all talking about the same thing, a dog, but we're all using different words. Okay? We could call it Canis domesticus and use the scientific name and be sure we're speaking about the same thing. Have you seen these guys before? Who's this? Catherine? Yeah, Wile E. Coyote, and this is Roadrunner. If you ever watched that Roadrunner cartoon, You'll notice at the very introduction they're like running around, and then they sort of freeze frame them. And what do they put underneath them?
Like these incorrect scientific.
Yeah, they put a scientific name. It's a fake scientific name though. They freeze like the roadrunners in midair, and then they put a scientific name below it. But they don't use the actual scientific name. The actual scientific name for roadrunner, it's a real bird, is Geococcix californis. Real name for a coyote is Canis latrans. But those aren't the names. They make up sort of funny Latin-sounding scientific names like Accelerati incredibus or Disapirius quickius, Birdius tastius. Those are some that are used for roadrunner. Coyote has been a roadrunner digestus, Appetitus giganticus, or Edius birdius. So again, those are just little jokes that they throw in there. They sound like Latin words, although they're not actually Latin words, and that's because scientific names are in Latin. So when we can put things in various groups, okay? And so these groups, you're going to have to memorize the proper order. Okay, and the groups start, the largest group, we call these the taxa. The largest group is called domain. Every single species on Earth is in one of 3 domains. Okay, these are very broad. There are many, many millions of species in these domains. They're not very specific. And species can be in the same domain but still not be very closely related. For example, a human and a pine tree are both in the same domain. Okay, so they're not very specific, these domains. If we go down another level, we go to kingdoms. Kingdoms are very broad as well. There's 6 kingdoms that all species go into. So again, it's still very broad. Are we in the same kingdom as a pine tree? We are not. We are in the same kingdom as a earthworm. All right, if we go a little bit more specific from kingdom, we move to phylum. From there we go to class, order, family, genus, and then our last level of classification is species. As we move down these groups, from domain down to species, we get more and more specific, and in each group there are fewer and fewer organisms. I'll give you a couple ways to remember these in a minute. But if we look at in these groups, and we look at some species here. So let's say I have a grizzly bear, a black bear, a panda bear, a fox, a squirrel, a snake, and a sea star. First off, those are all in the same domain. Domain isn't included on this list. It's above kingdom. It would be up here. They're all in the eukarya domain. But they are all animals. So they all belong in the same kingdom, kingdom Animalia. All right. So again, this is a very broad category. These things have some similarities, but they also have many differences. Obviously, a sea star and a panda, they're very different organisms. They're not really that closely related. As we go down another level, though, so we go from kingdom to phylum. Okay? Now, these species are all in the same phylum, phylum Chordata. Now, you notice the sea star is gone. It is not in the phylum Chordata. It's in the phylum Echinodermata. But do you know what these things have in common? Why do you think they're in the same phylum together? Can you notice anything about them? Boaz?
Four-legged mammals.
What's that?
They're all four-legged mammals.
The snake is a four-legged mammal?
Oh, no,
Yes.
they're all above-legged.
Wait, no, that's a snake.
No, it's not about where they live. Catherine?
They're all vertebrates.
They're all vertebrates. They all have a backbone. That's what the phylum Chordata means. Things with a spinal cord. So these are all vertebrates. Okay? Let's get another level down to the class. So now we got rid of the snake. Now we're in class Mammalia. Okay? Moaz, any idea what do these things have in common now?
They're all mammals.
They're all mammals. Yes, they all have fur, they all nurse their young. So again, now as we get rid of some of these, we're getting more and more specific. They're more closely related. All right, we go down another level. We're in order Carnivora. Okay, that has really to do more with the teeth than what they eat specifically. And again, now the squirrels are. Squirrels are rodent. It's in a separate group. Okay, if we go down this another step further, we go down to family. Family Ursidae. Ursidae family is the bear family. Does anyone know the name of the constellations? You know what the Big Dipper is called? Lena? Ursa Major, yes. And it means the great bear. Ursidae is the family of bears. Okay, now we're just off with the 3 bears. Then we get down to genus. Now we're getting even more specific. Genus is a specific type of bear. The panda is not in this group, but the grizzly and the black bear are. And then finally, once we get down to species, we're left with just one single organism in that group, and that is the grizzly bear. Ursus arctos is its scientific name. Now I'm going to give you 3 ways to remember these groups from domain down to species. So you have to memorize them in the proper order. There are 2 sentences you could use. One is, Dear King Philip came over for great soup. If you could remember that sentence, you could remember the order of these groups: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. There's another sentence that may be more memorable. It's not very nice, but if it helps you to remember it, I'll still let you use it. I don't really care what you use. Dumb kids play catch on the freeway, go splat. Guess that's not very nice, but domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Or, at the end of class, I'll play you a song that may help you remember. So as we look at these groups from very general to more specific, what goes on top? Raise your hand if you want to tell me what goes on top here. The first group, the most general. Gage?
Domain.
Domain. How about after that? Stephen? Kingdom. After that? The P? Kira? Phylum. How about after that? Class. Class. Tom? Order. Order. Yeah. Family. Next one, I gotta be careful. And the next one, how you say it? Jake?
Genus.
Genus. I know if you're looking at me, you probably want to say genius, but it's actually genus. There's no I in there. And then, last group? Patty? Species. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. All right, let's look at where humans, how are we classified here? Our domain is called eukarya.
Will this thing be on the test too?
Probably not. Which kingdom are we a part of? What?
Royal?
Not royal, no. What?
Animals?
Animals. These really do have Latin names as well. Animalia is what it's technically called. These are short. Phylum. You may know if you remember what we just went over. Lena? That's one step down, not yet. Phylum, Abby? Yeah, chordata. We are chordates. We are vertebrates. Then, as Lena said, our class is Mammalia. How about order? So what type of mammals are humans? Monkeys, apes, and some other organisms are, what is that broad category called, Jake?
Primates?
Yeah, primates. Now you won't know probably the next one, because humans are the only member of the family Hominidae. And then you should be able to come up with our genus and species, because this is what makes up all organisms' scientific name. Scientific name is made of the genus and then the species. So we already talked about our scientific name. So what genus are humans? What? Yep, Homo. Means man. The next word means knowing. Abby? Sapiens. And that's why our scientific name is Homo sapiens. It comes from the genus combined with the species. All right, now just last slide for today. We have, again, the three bears. Panda, polar bear, the grizzly bear. Haloropoda melanoluca, Ursus maritimus, Ursus arctos. Which of these bears do you think are most closely related? Kira?
The polar bear and the grizzly bear,
Why did you pick those two?
because they both have like curses.
Right. They're in the same genus. They're both in the genus Ursus, whereas the panda is in a separate genus. So it's not quite as closely related to those bears as they are to each other. The last thing to know is about how we write scientific names. Whenever you're writing a scientific name, you have to write it in a certain way. What do you notice about how these are written? Paige?
Those from the vowel
Well, they do. That's just sort of coincidence, though. Not all scientific names have to start like that. Jake?
The first word has a capital and the second word is lowercase.
Yes, the first word is always capitalized, the genus, and the species first letter is always lowercaseified. And I did make up that word, and I copyrighted it and trademarked it, so if you decide you'd like to use it in a sentence, it's just a 25-cent per use fee. But anyway, the first letter of genus is capitalized, the species name is lowercaseified. What about, do you notice anything about the style of writing for those?
Italian.
What's that?
They're both Italian. They're all Italian.
Yeah, they're italicized, so you have to italicize them. So you have to learn how to print in italics, how to write in italics. You don't really. You could just underline rather than italicize. If you're using the computer or something, you can put it in italics. But if you're writing by hand, you just underline it rather than italicize it. So first letter of genus is capitalized, everything is lowercaseified. And they're underlined or italicized. All right, any questions?
before you leave today, I want to show you this video to help you remember the order.